Hello, thank you for joining us, distinguished guests and student leaders, to the Rising Sea Levels topic research panel. This entire presentation has been coordinated by the members of our Student Advisory Council. We pride that our program encourages leadership, and this is certainly evident from this group's work for this research panel on rising sea levels. My name is April Mickley. I am the Executive Director, and I am proud to welcome all of you to this session. We do have some community guidelines I would like to go over. I do want to let everyone know that this event will be recorded. The people that did sign up to attend the session, we will be providing them with the recording in case they missed it. The chat feature should be used to discuss any items related to the panel or respond to things posed by the moderators. Please keep all items in the chat related to the topic and not repeat or discuss things that aren't relevant to the panel itself. If you have a question, please use the Q&A feature. That is where you would include a follow-up question or a new question to the speakers. The moderators will do their very best to answer as many of these questions as possible, depending on the nature of the questions asked and the time remaining. We will be ending at exactly 6 p.m. Eastern. We may not have time for all of the questions. The moderators will also be previewing the questions, not to ask the same question more than one time. So just know that we will be making sure that the Q&A questions are applicable to the topic and not repeating questions that were already asked. We hope you enjoy this session. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to the Future Problem Solving Student Advisory Council. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Vedika. I'm the Executive Coordinator for the Student Advisory Council.
Hi, I'm Mahi. I'm the Student Advisory Council's Vice Executive Coordinator.
And on behalf of the Future Problem Solving Student Advisory Council, we are really thrilled to host this event, and we are so excited to see everyone here.
We at the Student Advisory Council work to support problem solvers around the world through resources like these panels, other research materials, newsletters, guides, etc.
And so we'd love for you guys to all be a part of the mission as well, and we are still accepting applications, so stick around at the end for more info.
Now we'll turn it over to Cyrus and Trevor, our research directors and moderators this afternoon, to get started. Thank
you to Vedika and Mahi for that kind introduction. So I'm super excited and honored to welcome everybody in attendance today and kick off our panel on the topic of rising sea levels, which is the topic for Practice Problem 2 this year. My name is Cyrus, and I'm a co-research director for the Student Advisory Group.
Hi everyone, my name is Trevor, and I'm another co-research director for the Future Problem Solving Student Advisory Council. And for those of you who are brand new to the topic of rising sea levels, we're going to provide you with a brief overview before we begin. So here it is. Two processes cause sea level rise: thermal expansion, ocean water expansion as it heats up, and additional water flow into oceans from ice that melts on land. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports that sea levels have risen by 0.19 meters since the beginning of the 20th century. Sea level rise will continue for centuries, if not thousands of years, after greenhouse gas concentrations are stabilized due to the long lag times involved in warming the oceans and ice sheets response, possibly affecting over 400 million people. So the question that we are posing for this topic is, how might rising sea levels impact our coastlines, industries, and people's lives in the future?
Okay, so without further ado, I'm excited to introduce our three panelists today. We have Dr. Claudia Tebaldi, who's a scientist, Dr. Robert Nicholls, who is a professor of climate adaptation, as well as Dr. Dishane Hewavithana, who is a conservation biologist. Thank you to all of them for taking the time out of their busy schedules to talk with us today a little bit about rising sea levels research and the future of the field.
We reviewed the questions that you all have submitted, and we've compiled a list of our questions for our question and answer session. If any new questions arise during the session, feel free to put them into the chat, and we will try to answer them if time allows.
Before we begin with the Q&A, let's just give each of the speakers a brief opportunity to introduce themselves. You can just go in the order listed on the screen. So Dr. Tebaldi, if you wouldn't mind sharing a bit about yourself.
Yes, hi everybody. Thanks for joining and attending this panel. I'm a statistician by training, but I've been working as a scientist, trying to understand, mostly future projections of many things, among them sea level rise and storm surges. So I guess that's the reason I'm here, and I'm excited to try and address as many questions as I can.
Hello, I'm Robert Nicholls. So I'm based actually in the UK. My background, I'm a coastal engineer by training, and I've been looking at the issue of long-term coastal change and sort of sea level being one of the big factors that causes that over my whole career, and thinking about the risks and how we adapt to those changes. So I'm looking forward to talking with you today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dishane Hewavithana. My background is conservation biology and environmental science. I work mostly with communities to find solutions and also to improve resilience towards climate change impacts. Sea level rise being one of the major concerns we are trying to understand and tackle with. Looking forward to the discussion today.
Okay, thank you all for sharing. Let's jump into our Q&A session. So our first question is just an intro question. A couple of the participants were just curious, what inspired you to enter your respective fields relating to rising sea levels research, and what has kept you engaged with it over the years?
Shall we still go in the order? My interest in addressing problems related to sea level was actually generated by the fact that I was working for an organization called Climate Central that you can actually look up, climatecentral.org. The organization had the mission of communicating mostly to the US public about climate change, its impacts, its solutions. And we thought that sea level rise would be a very cogent and, even visually effective channel through which communicating, the importance of being prepared for climate change and its consequences, and of course try to mitigate them. So we thought let's try to look at future changes in storm surges that are so impactful for people living on the coast, and let's study what sea level rise means for the change in these storm surges. So that's how my interest started, and that's how it continues right now, sea level rise being one of the most impactful effects of climate change.
Well, I suppose I started off with a love of coasts, really, and particularly beaches. And I did research initially on coastal erosion, and that sort of then, and so the issue of sea level rise started to emerge when I was doing my PhD. And then I came to the US as a sort of postdoctoral researcher, and I started doing they started doing funded research on that question, and it was a fascinating question. And the coasts are the most densely populated part of the Earth's surface. You've got hundreds of millions of people potentially affected, and so it seems like both an interesting and an important question. So and that's kept me interested for the last sort of 30 years.
Since we talk about how the interest began, I have to go to the very root of how my research interest started. I was interested in ecology first, and then moved into conservation biology. and I'm originally from Sri Lanka. When I was working on conservation biology, I got to work with an environmental law firm where I identified a huge gap between science education in academic institutions and in the community, the gap, and how it is, how much it is important to incorporate what we find in research into actual policy implementation and community education. That made me interested in environmental science and policy, and that made me feel like I'm actually making an impact through the findings that I do behind the desk in computer doing geospatial analysis or anything that I do using all the technical stuff. And I wanted to communicate it to the public and do community science, like get the public engaged and incorporate our findings to policy decision making. So that's what got me interested.
Awesome, thank you. So a lot of our FPSers are wondering a lot about the concerns regarding rising sea levels. And throughout your work, we were wondering, what have you found to be the major causes of rising sea levels in general, and what factors contribute most to this problem on a global scale?
Well, you had that slide of introduction, so you already answered part of this question. So we know that warming warms up the waters of the oceans, and they expand as a consequence. So the volume of water becomes bigger and causes sea level rise. But then even more importantly, actually, as we come closer and closer to current day and into the future, is the effect of warming on ice sheets, and which are a major contribution of sea level rise, like you said in that slide. By melting the ice that is right now on land, we expand the amount of water in the ocean and cause sea level rise. So those are the main drivers. And for me, the most concerning aspect is that when it comes to ice sheets, their behavior is so complex that we are having a really hard time modeling it and saying something robust about what's happening beyond just the effect of simple melting. So the dynamics of ice collapsing and sliding into the ocean, we have a really hard time quantifying their effects. So.
And I suppose I would actually add, just to add one thing that you didn't mention that we do think about when we're looking at risks and adaptation is also the vertical land motion. So you do, if you're on a piece of coast and the sea is rising, you don't actually know, is the land sinking, is the sea rising, or are both happening? And actually many places on the Earth's coast are sinking. And so that's something else that also needs to be thought about. So we talk about there's climate-induced sea level rise, if you like, the change in the volume of the ocean, but there's relative sea level rise that also includes the land. And so that's, to my work, that's very important to consider.
I think Dr. Tebaldi and Dr. Nicholls covered the entire answer. All I want to add to this is like not taking timely precautions to prevent further impacts from sea level rising could exacerbate the impacts that we are experiencing through the issues.
Okay, thank you all for shedding some light on that. Our next question is a little more solutions oriented, and some participants were curious about how reliable are current models in predicting sea level rise, which includes relative sea level rise too, and what challenges do scientists face in improving these models, as well as are there some negative effects of some of these solutions?
I was going to give somebody else the precedence because I don't want to be always the first one to talk, but
oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, go.
I would not, Dr. Nicholls, I'm not an expert on models, but what I wanted to say is that current models are giving a generic idea. Something that we do at Florida International University at Sea Level Solutions Center is we are trying to collect localized information on sea level rise and its impacts, flooding impacts, to see whether like these generalized models are accurately predicting the sea level rise. So what we do is we collect data at a more local scale, a smaller scale, and then we compare it against these general models. So that's some work in progress that we're doing.
Well, if I follow up, I mean, I think there's sort of two questions there. There's, can you we can measure sea level rise. You've mentioned in your introductory remarks the 0.19 meter rise, and so can we actually explain why that's happened? And I think right now, I mean, with a lot of work, I don't work in this area, but colleagues have developed methods where they can pretty much explain where that sea level has come from, a sea level budget. So we do understand what's happened in the past. I think Claudia made the good point that when we go forward into the future, we have a few unknowns. What will the level of greenhouse gas emissions be? That then leads to warming. How does the planet respond to that warming? So there's quite a lot of uncertainty in the big ice sheet. So she's already made that point. But I think the answer here, that's the big uncertainty, the amount of emissions and then how the Earth responds. So there's a lot of, despite being able to understand what's happened, it's very hard to sort of predict. And so we have to sort of be honest, I suppose, and explore futures where things aren't so bad and futures maybe where they are quite bad, and and they're probably all plausible, and with time maybe the science will get better and we'll be able to reduce those uncertainties, although I actually think to some extent we'll probably have to live with those uncertainties in the next few decades when we're trying to deal with this problem. Claudia?
Yeah, and what I would add to the uncertainty portfolio here is that we are also fairly unsure of how sea level rise will distribute itself around the coast. So we can say something about global sea level rise with all the uncertainties that were already mentioned. And then one major, important issue is we know that different areas of the coast around the world will experience different sea level rise, not only because of what Robert mentioned already about land subsidence or land rising, but also because sea level rise is driven also by currents, how they are distributed, and models are very variable across themselves. So we don't have a very robust pattern of sea level change around the coast. So that's another aspect of our limitation that calls for, and I'm not the expert here, we have experts on the panel, but calls for types of adaptation that are, robust to this uncertainty, that don't need this very precise level of information to start preparing, while we also, of course, should start mitigating.
Thank you. So obviously we know a lot of research has been done on rising sea levels and its effects across the globe. And I know, Dr. Hewavithana, you mentioned that you worked locally with problems that arise from rising sea levels. But for all three of you, we have a lot of competitors wondering, how will the effects of rising sea levels impact the lives of each and every one of us, whether we live close to a coast, on a coast, or far away from the coast? Within the next few decades, how can we see these issues arising in our own day-to-day lives?
So in a day-to-day basis time frame, the change we experience would be like very minimum. And in a context like this, it's almost like, unless a person who has the expertise and has a better understanding would explain it to the people, they would not even notice it. It's a subtle change that happens over time. That's why people keep doing the things that are like making the situation worse. So in a local context, if I were to tell you, like, what we do is we have been monitoring flooding situation in Miami-Dade County on king tide events. This program has been going on for 9 years. We incorporate citizen scientists each year to collect data on flooding on the day of king tide floods. And then that way we communicate how important it is to be aware of the sea level rise related impacts and what they could do as citizen scientists to keep an eye out and contribute in their capacity. So to answer your question, the change that we experience on a day-to-day basis, I would say for an individual in the public, it would be minimum to notice on a day-to-day basis, but it's a long-term impact that we have to look at and focus on.
I mean, just to follow up, I mean, I think one of the things that's emerging is what's called sunny day. I mean, this is or blue skies flooding, when actually in the past you often associate floods with a storm and bad weather. And now flooding is happening much more frequently because the mean of the sea is higher. So you don't need to get such extreme events. And so on king tides, we call them spring tides in the UK, you see increased flooding. And then if you get a big storm, the water levels are higher, so you get more damage. And actually, it's hard to see it as an individual, but in the models, you see quite large growth in damages around the world if we don't do adaptation. So incrementally, it's having an effect on people on the coast. And I think you said, how would it affect people a long way from the coast? Well, I think disasters at the coast affect the economy. So they will. I mean, so there is an indirect effect, and we can talk about. Won't get into that, but I mean, clearly the consequences of some of the hurricanes that have happened in Florida are quite large, and sea level rise has exacerbated them. I'm not saying that sea level rise has caused them, but it's contributed to the damage that has been caused.
Yeah, I was about to say exactly that there are studies that actually try to quantify how much further inland storm surges could go because they had a higher launch pad from the sea level that was higher than in the past. So sea level is not just about sea level rise itself, it's about making the damages from things like hurricanes or other type of storms worse. And we haven't yet mentioned the problem of small island states where the problem of sea level rise is an existential problem, and there are islands that are considering the population of these islands has to start considering moving because they would be submerged by sea level rise in the long run. And we talk about migration, climate exiles, and this could be an effect, by which people that are that need to relocate because of sea level rise could impact, the living of the living standards of other people by adding to stresses and economic competition. So there are many effects that are not just localized to where things happen.
Okay. Yeah, I think those are all great things to keep in mind for our future problem solving competitors in their competitions. So our next question, I guess, is taking a step back and just thinking about what has your guys' experience been with translating your research into actionable policy initiatives, or if you haven't had direct experience with that, what have you seen or how have you observed government/policymakers and how have they worked with climate researchers?
Well, if I start then, I said I came to the States and started working on sea level rise, and I came back to the UK. So certainly I've worked in an environment where there's lots of government interest in this. So a lot of my research has been funded by UK, US governments, and also by other, by other governments. So I think that then you're sort of you're answering questions that are set by policymakers, if you like. So a while ago, at the beginning, it was, is this a problem? Was often that and then how big could it be? And over time, it's become much more, what can we do about it, I suppose. So so it's moved from assessing the problem to thinking about solutions. And I think now, I mean, I think one of the challenges is actually to really try and spread the knowledge that we have on sea level and adaptation, so that, because adaptation is something that's got to happen everywhere, essentially, on the coast, and lots of many people need to be involved in that. Maybe we'll be questions about adaptation in the moment, but it's trying to maybe sort of empower people to make decisions outside universities. We tend to work in the academic sector, working with government, and actually to sort of spread that more widely. But anyway, that's enough from me. I'll pass over to one of my colleagues.
If I were to share my experience with incorporating these findings into policy, I would say that there's a huge, being a coastal area, like I work in Miami, there's a huge interest from the government sector in almost all community programs. The county is involved, and they're very interested with what we're finding and what we receive from community as they're experiencing. And those those findings definitely go into their adaptation planning, and I would say information that we find through community programs and research in this small scale program that I'm involved in. It's really feeding into policy making, and it's making an impact. As I say, there is an influence.
So I do not have experience of informing decision making or policy making at the local scale in particular. But maybe the audience would be interested in knowing that that the 1.5 degree target that we all hear about and we know about was really occasioned or pushed during the Paris Agreement by representatives of the small island states, because it is considered critical in having a future where these parts of the world can survive, as opposed to a future where they are going to disappear. And there is a lot of uncertainty, of course, about what is really the crucial difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees world. But some of the research pointed the fact that 1.5 was relatively and critically safer for these concerns than 2 degrees, which was for a long time considered, a threshold that would make the difference between dangerous interference with the climate system or not. So here we are using sea level rise as really one of the levers for some really worldwide policy that is informing a lot of our actions and discussions and decisions.
Thank you. So I know, Dr. Nicholls, you mentioned in a previous question that one of the biggest effects of rising sea levels that affects all of us, not just those of us living on the coast, is its effects on the economy. And something that our competitors were wondering is just how can rising sea levels impact economic operations and development along coastal regions? And are there any industries that are more susceptible to these effects than others?
Well, if I'll start then. I mean, well, yes. I mean, rising sea levels increase increase the frequency of flooding. So that, I mean, so any activity along the coast is going to be could be impacted. The small islands have been mentioned. That's an sort of extreme case. Places like the Maldives, which are extremely low, but and I suppose, you know, obviously things like ports and harbors, airports, there's an awful lot of different types of human activity that are concentrated on the coast. If you look at the distribution of population, people disproportionately live below 10 meters elevation. I mean, I think humans are attracted to the sea, but it's economically a good place to be. Ports and harbors, trade, etc. Lots of agriculture on deltas. I mean, there's hundreds of millions of people living on deltas, not very far above sea level. Around the world, and the Mississippi being an example, but there's a lot more people in Asia and the Nile, and then in Africa in the Nile Delta, than in the US deltas. So so the effects, I think, can be absolutely immense, and you know, and all the cities. Think of New York or Los Angeles or Tokyo, Shanghai, Mumbai, just to give sort of five of the really big cities in the world. But there's hundreds of large cities on the coast around the world as well. So again, and they're all linked to the economy. So certainly this has very big economic effects. And even if we adapt, of course, it's money being diverted into it'll mean money needs to be spent on adaptation. So that's another economic effect. Adaptation doesn't come free; it costs money. So that's another thing that will have an economic effect.
I think that's very nicely put, Dr. Nicholls. I 100% agree. Coming from Sri Lanka, I also grew up in a coastal city, and the major economic aspect in the community I grew up is like not the community in the city is fisheries. So it has a major economic impact. And also, I want to bring up this a geospatial study that we did with a collaboration with some scientists in India. The leading author has worked on site as well. I contributed remotely. What we found was that we looked at land use change across 2 decades in this cluster of islands, where it was reported a high rate of relocation among the communities, major reason being sea level rise. So two major findings we saw was that shrimp culturing was increasing closer to the land. That changes natural habitats into more commercial land use types, which was negatively impacting the natural areas in the study site, and also towards the ocean, in the areas that are open to the ocean, there was another decline, natural areas were declining due to rising sea levels because the open water and ocean was degrading the mangroves. So there are economic impacts causing, like, it's 2 ways. Naturally, the sea level rise is causing these natural areas to degrade, and also the humans changing their behaviors and relocating, that also affects degradation of natural areas. So it's multiple impacts caused by the same reason.
I'll just add a couple of things, even if it's hard, because you guys have already covered a lot. One interesting thing I found out was even during times when climate research in the US was a little difficult because of lack of interest in some of the high spaces. One aspect that made sea level rise very cogent was the fact that a lot of military bases in the US are close to the coast. So it was deemed still very important to understand how vulnerable these places would be to sea level rise and storm surges and flooding. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is insurance. You know that you must have heard that insurance is hard to come by already in places that are over and over again, impacted by climate change in general. So it is the case if you are in California, that probably it's hard to get insurance against fires. And if you are in Florida, it's probably getting harder and harder to get insurance against floods. And so that's another, economic impact of sea level rise.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing your insight. Our next question, I know it's not your area of expertise, so no worries if you can't speak to lengths about it, but a couple competitors are asking, what international relations concerns might arise due to changing access to natural resources along coastal areas or due to changing sea levels in general?
Well, I'll chip in then. Well, I think the notion of people moving is migration. Actually, I think is probably quite an important issue. I think that we've done quite a lot of work on looking at migration in islands and deltas, and what I suppose what one observes is that people are migrating already. So there's a lot of migration. We live in a planet where people are moving, but I think then sea level rise, I think, perturbs that and makes migration more likely in particularly small islands and deltas. And then where do these people go? And so, I mean, if they're moving within their national boundaries, that in itself is a big issue. But then if they start to cross national boundaries, this is clearly, as we can see, I mean, it's a huge issue all around the world. And so that anything that exacerbates migration is going to cause lots of problems and lots of issues around conflict and lots of costs to society, really. So that's something that can be avoided, that should be tried to be avoided as much as possible. I think another one, I suppose, another issue actually is sea level tends to degrade coastal ecosystems. Maybe as the land submerges, new ones emerge inland, but that will also have an effect on fisheries. So in terms of some of the natural resources that we take for granted may be less available because of sea level rise, and also humans are often degrading these things as well. So it's maybe a compounded problem. I'll stop there and let my colleagues add anything they'd like.
I would like to bring attention to ecotourism opportunities that are available along coastlines as well. If we were to control access to natural resources, natural areas could be taken as a resource for ecotourism related commercial activities as well. So when we do that, that's why regulation is important. We should not be taking drastic actions in order to cut down something, it has to be systematic. So some regulation would definitely help. That's what we need also.
I don't think I can add anything that wasn't already mentioned. So.
Thank you. So this next question, not only were competitors wondering about it before the meeting, but we've seen many of you ask using the Q&A function, which thank you for utilizing that. But of course, there are many researchers and professionals working on rising sea levels globally. But is there anything that we can do in our day-to-day lives to help mitigate maybe our impact or the impact of our communities on rising sea levels around the world?
Well, I'll start if you like. I think, well, clearly, there's two responses to this problem. One is climate mitigation. So we made the point that the amount of sea level rise that will happen in the future will depend on present and future greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. So reducing future emissions, reducing emissions today and into the future, is I think is an important activity. And I think one can look at one's own behavior, but also one can actually campaign, and I think again, what one would do in one's own life probably is smaller than if you can actually collectively encourage people to do to act together, because it's so I think that's one thing that I think people can do. And secondly, in the issue really of adaptation, again, I think really hopefully in this group understanding the problem we're talking about, and probably supporting efforts to do this. I mean, people can act in their own community, but maybe some things probably need to be done maybe at a more aggregate scale. So that needs political support, working together to achieve ends. And so I think, so that's so I suppose in a sense maybe I'm talking about almost your own behavior and the politics of the situation, really, if I distill it down to one sentence. I'll hand over to my colleagues.
Actually, the last point that Nicholls mentioned is what I wanted to highlight too, because what we could do on day-to-day basis is mostly to be aware of what's happening and what solutions are there. Like, these solutions are not, I wouldn't say, like, it's a collective effort. It has to be a collective effort. So us understanding what the issue is and supporting any solution that makes sense, like nature-based solutions, incorporating infrastructure that are green and gray, like it's combination. So every solution is going to have to be made case by case, like not like we can't make one one solution applied to all the problems related to sea level solutions. So we have to be aware of and also advocate, like support these decisions in order to implement them, is what I would say.
Yeah, I don't think I can add much more, except maybe being committed to communicate and to talk about these things and combat, skepticism and misinformation. It's also something we can do as we learn and as we understand. We can act as trusted communicators among our families and friends, and things can start from these small things and percolate through.
One small thing I would like to add. So if I would add like this little thing also to my previous answer, there are opportunities in your local areas that are happening. Say, for instance, to communicate a solution, a nature-based solution, or a huge construction that is happening in a mangrove-related habitat, or something to do with nature. There are like all these developmental activities or any solution that the governments or any other party is implementing. It is being communicated, most of the time it is being communicated to the public. So what you can do is try and engage with these events and learn about the development and give your support to the way that it happens in the most eco-friendly manner. So that's something we can do as public.
Thank you. Yeah, all great things to keep in mind for everyone listening. Okay, our next question is a bit more general, and it's just, what advice would you give to aspiring climate researchers, or even just aspiring researchers in general? Is there something you would recommend students to do that you regret not doing?
I would just say, try what interests you most, because that's your interest and your excitement towards what you do is what keeps you going. So do what excites you in research or anything related to climate change impacts. Like, what you want to do should be exciting for you. So I would say that.
I would also add to not to be shy and try to find good mentors, good advisors, good senior colleagues that can guide you and can act as liaison to the larger community, because when you start as a young researcher, it's difficult to do everything on your own, right? And sometimes we are afraid of asking for advice and help, but usually senior people are happy to help in this respect. So don't shy away from looking for this type of figures in your life that can help you. And there are also some nice organization of peers that can support you and help you reach your goals. So don't try to do everything by yourself.
And I suppose I think the point about passion is important, because I think when I was talking about, I started working on coasts, a long time ago, and then moved into working on sea level rise, coastal erosion. But I've always found what I'm doing I've enjoyed it. So I'm very privileged that I'm working on something that I find interesting, and I enjoy, even though it's got its negative sides. I still find studying coasts and very interesting. And so I think follow your passion and look at what makes you tick. Really, I think is a comment to all of the students on the call, because I think when you're doing things you enjoy, you'll do things well and better. And there's always bad times when you're on a journey through life. So if you're really enjoying things, it helps you through those days when things aren't going as well as they might.
And maybe if I can add something else that you made me think about, Robert, is that, life is random a lot of times. So don't be turned off or intimidated by the possibility that sometimes things don't go exactly like you were hoping they would or you were planning, and be open and be ready to embrace opportunities without too rigid an idea of what you need to do and what's the key to success. Because I think in my life, at least, if I think about the different aspects that brought me here and there to what I am right now, a lot of that was very close to random. so don't be scared by that.
Thank you. So we have just a couple more questions here about rising sea levels. And I know all three of you have mentioned at some point during this panel the need for adaptations in communities regarding rising sea levels, and also that one of the biggest ways that we can make change is by getting together with other people in our community in order to foster that change. So with the risk of major climate tipping points like collapse of major ice sheets and things like that, how can people work together within their communities to prepare for big impacts from events that may not seem very likely at this moment in time?
I would just reiterate the need to mitigate, let's try and make those events less likely. Really, I think that's, really adapting to tipping points. It's possible, but it's going to be very challenging, and it won't go right everywhere. So there'll be disasters in that process. It's not a world that one would choose, should we say? I mean, we may end up living in it, but if I had a choice, I would avoid that world. But in terms of maybe your question, thinking about adaptation, even if we have a great outcome and we say, let's imagine we stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in 2050. I mean, it's probably unlikely we're going to do that, to be honest, but let's imagine that we do. Sea levels will keep on rising. And so there's this thing we call a commitment to sea level rise. So even if we stabilize climate with a bit of warming, the sea will keep on rising. So each generation has to do a little bit more than the generation before. We talk about adaptation pathways, where maybe you will do something, but you realize your children will have to do a bit more, and so you can start to plan. An example is actually London, where they've actually looked at. In London has big flood defences, so big traditional engineering, big flood walls, barriers that can close, and they've worked out a plan of incremental upgrade. London's very valuable, so we can afford to spend a huge amount of money to protect it. Billions of pounds can be spent, or billions of dollars, over the years. But they're doing it in a number of steps, and I think you can take that philosophy to any situation. So it may be a place you're pulling back from the sea, not building big walls, but I think so I think a long-term view, not too rigid because the future's uncertain, but just but some sort of planning, I think, approach would be wise. And people mentioned Miami, so that many places in the US coast, just having a plan of what you would do would be my sort of advice. I'll hand over to my colleagues.
I really don't have anything to add. I think that's great. Adaptation pathways.
Yeah, same. I would say that every little action we like, this might seem very small, but in a granular scale, like in your day-to-day life, make sustainable choices as far as you can. And also remember, like we can't, like you have to accept that you can't be an extremist in any case. So live a middle life, being sustainable is what I would say.
Okay, thank you all for your thoughts. Looking at the time right now, maybe one or two questions, then we can wrap up our panel for today. So the next question, it's a broad question, so feel free to approach it however you like. It's that considering how sea levels impact countries differently, with several developing nations being harmed the most, how can we make sure that solutions are fair and provide support to those areas?
That's a very timely question given COP just concluded, but the idea is that the developed world should contribute substantially to adaptation of the developing areas of the world, and unfortunately that has proven to be a very contentious and difficult deal to make. But the idea is to still allow these places to develop as smoothly and easily as possible. They have the right to do that, like we did, thanks to our use of fossil fuels. But we have to be both, contributing to their possibility to adapt to climate change as it is already, and also share technologies and share solutions and do more than our part to mitigate, to balance off what cannot be mitigated as fast and as radically in the developing world.
So I suppose, yeah, I think, yeah, I agree with all that. And I think, really, I think we made the point earlier about some of the problems that sea level will cause, that it's also probably in our interests to actually avoid some of these impacts, that, for example, the idea of large scale migration, etc. So that if we help by, in adaptation terms, help, make sure that development, there's USAID, for example. I mean, that what they're doing is sensible development, and development that takes into account climate change, actually. So sometimes you find people are doing development and they're acting like there's no climate change. And so making sure that adaptation and development work together, and it's adequately funded, and that there's lots of technology transfer to support that, I think. And that includes, that probably includes people from developing, in education as well. I mean, that's obviously training people, and exchange, and lots of discussions like this. I mean, this process here, I suppose, in many ways, is a little microcosm of what needs to happen, actually. So anyway, so I think you can say this is part of the process.
I think I don't have anything much new to add. It's a comprehensive answer you got for the question. Different parts of the world, depending on the economic situation, different countries have different sets of priorities, but that's how I see why different countries make choices when it comes to development and implementing these solutions. So it's overall it's about doing what's needed and necessary, and yeah, that's all I would have to add to this.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. That was our final question. So we'd like to thank all of our attendees for attending this panel. And on behalf of the entire future problem solving community, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to our expert panelists tonight, Dr. Tebaldi, Dr. Nicholls, and Dr. Hewavithana for their time and insights today.
Thank you, Trevor, and to the students of the Student Advisory Group. I think I can capture everyone who listened in that we all learned a lot from the experts and certainly deepened our knowledge of this really important topic. So thank you so very much, and the recording will be available for anyone who missed it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.